I used to believe that love could fix anything. That if you loved someone deeply enough, you could weather every storm together. When I met Daniel, he made me believe in that kind of fairy tale. He was charming, attentive, and had this quiet confidence that made me feel safe. Everyone around us called us the perfect couple, two people who seemed meant to be. But what no one saw, not even me at first, were the small cracks beneath that perfect surface. I was 26 when we got married. I remember the wedding like it was yesterday, the scent of white lilies in the air, the sparkle in his eyes when he said, "I'll always protect you." It sounded like a promise. But sometimes, promises become prisons. In the beginning, he was everything I wanted. He sent good morning texts before I even woke up, opened doors for me, and talked about our future with excitement. He said he wanted to build a home filled with laughter and trust. I believed him with all my heart. But as months passed, subtle changes began to appear. It started with small things. Him asking who I was texting, then making jokes about my friends being a bad influence. At first, I laughed it off. He's just protective, I told myself. That's what love looks like. Soon, those jokes turned into criticism. "Why do you always wear makeup? Who are you trying to impress?" he'd say with a cold smile. I'd shrug and brush it off, but deep down, a quiet unease started to grow. I stopped wearing lipstick because it made him uncomfortable. I stopped meeting friends because it made him suspicious. I told myself it was just compromise. That's what marriage requires, right? But compromise shouldn't feel like erasure. A year into our marriage, I barely recognized myself. I used to be outgoing, full of laughter and curiosity. Now I measured my every word, my every move, worried that something I said or did might upset him. He never raised his hand on me, but his silence could cut deeper than any slap. When he was angry, he wouldn't shout. He'd withdraw completely, making me beg for his attention, his forgiveness, even when I didn't know what I'd done wrong. I became a shadow in my own home. The worst part was how skillfully he made me believe it was my fault. If he was upset, it was because I hadn't been supportive enough. If he was distant, it was because I was too emotional. I began apologizing for everything, for being tired, for wanting affection, for simply existing in ways that displeased him. My friends noticed the change. One evening, my best friend Layla took my hand and said softly, "You don't laugh the same anymore." I laughed it off, of course. "Marriage changes people," I said. She looked at me for a long time, like she wanted to say more but didn't. I wish she had. Maybe I would have listened. But I wasn't ready to see the truth. There were good days too, days when he'd bring me coffee in bed, when we'd watch movies and he'd rest his head on my shoulder. Those were the days that kept me hooked, that made me think things would get better. He'd say, "You're the only one who really understands me." And I wanted to believe that was love, not manipulation. Until one night. It was our second anniversary. I had spent the entire day preparing his favorite dinner, wearing the dress he once said made me look beautiful. He came home late, smelling of alcohol and exhaustion. When I asked if everything was okay, he stared at me and said, "You always need everything to be perfect, don't you? It's exhausting." I stood there, holding a plate of food, feeling something inside me crack. I didn't cry that night. Instead, I sat by the window while he slept, staring at the reflection of a woman I barely recognized. The girl who once believed love could heal anything now looked hollow, almost unrecognizable. That was the night I whispered to myself, "Something's wrong." It wasn't courage yet, not even realization. Just a whisper. But it was enough to start the shift inside me. The following weeks, I began noticing patterns I had ignored. How he'd isolate me subtly, how his affection came with conditions, how my happiness seemed to depend entirely on his moods. I started keeping a journal, writing down how he spoke to me, how it made me feel. It was my secret rebellion, a way to hold on to my truth when he tried to rewrite it. And slowly, I started to remember who I was before him. One morning, as I watched him leave for work, I looked around our beautiful apartment, the framed photos, the spotless kitchen, the illusion of a perfect life, and realized how empty it all felt. I had spent so long trying to be the perfect wife that I'd forgotten how to be myself. That day, I made a promise.
Not to him.
Not to the world, but to me. I promised that I would start finding the woman I had lost, the one who laughed without fear, who loved without needing permission. I didn't know how or when, but I knew this. Someday soon, I was going to save myself. And that's how my journey began. Not with a scream, but with a quiet whisper that refused to die. When you live in silence long enough, it starts to sound normal. You begin to think peace means walking on eggshells, that love means enduring the storm quietly. That's what my life had become, a constant balancing act between his moods and my fear of upsetting him. After that night, the anniversary dinner that ended with cold words and a colder silence, something in me changed. I stopped trying to make him happy all the time. I still cared, but I started noticing. Every word, every expression, every small manipulation I used to overlook suddenly stood out like cracks on a mirror. Daniel wasn't always cruel. That's what made it so confusing. There were mornings when he'd wake up early, make me breakfast, kiss my forehead, and tell me he loved me. But then, by evening, he'd find some reason to withdraw. A tone I used, a word I said, or something I hadn't done the right way. His moods controlled the rhythm of our home, and I was always 2 steps behind, trying to predict the next storm.
He didn't yell.
He didn't hit. He did something far worse. He made me doubt myself. If I told him he hurt my feelings, he'd smirk and say, "You're too sensitive." If I said I felt lonely, he'd sigh, "I can't be everything for you, you know." And if I cried, he'd go quiet for hours, letting guilt eat me alive until I apologized. Some nights, he'd turn off his phone when he went out and claim he just needed space. I'd wait, pacing the floor, my mind spiraling with worry. When he came home, he'd accuse me of being controlling, of acting like his mother. Slowly, I stopped asking where he was. Stopped asking anything. That's how control works, not through force, but through fear of losing what little peace you have left. I remember one morning, I got dressed for work, a presentation I had been preparing for weeks. I wore a navy blue dress, one I hadn't touched in months because he'd once called it too tight. When he saw me, he stared for a moment, then said, "You look desperate for attention." Just like that, my confidence vanished. I changed before leaving. At the office, my colleagues praised my work, but I couldn't feel it. I was trapped in his voice, the one that told me I wasn't good enough, that no one else would love me the way he did. But the truth is, he didn't love me. He loved control. One evening, after another fight over something trivial, I think it was about me buying a new notebook without asking first, I locked myself in the bathroom. I sat on the cold floor, listening to the muffled hum of the television outside, and for the first time, I admitted it to myself. This isn't love. It should have felt like betrayal, but instead, it felt like freedom, a small flicker of truth breaking through the fog. I started spending more time at work, volunteering for extra projects, staying late under the pretense of deadlines. It wasn't about ambition anymore. It was about escape. In that office, surrounded by laughter and ordinary chaos, I could breathe. I could exist without fear. One day, after a particularly long meeting, my manager pulled me aside. "You look tired," she said gently. "Are you okay?" I wanted to say yes, but my throat tightened. It had been months since anyone asked me that with genuine concern. I managed to smile and said, "Just tired." But that question stayed with me all night. Am I okay? The answer was no. I wasn't. When I got home that night, Daniel was waiting in the living room, his phone in hand. "Why didn't you answer my texts?" he asked. His voice was calm, but his eyes weren't. "I was in a meeting," I replied. "For 6 hours?" He tossed his phone on the couch. "You think I'm stupid?" I froze. I knew this tone. The quiet rage before the storm. He accused me of hiding something. He said he could feel that I was lying, that I must be cheating, that no decent wife would come home that late. I tried to explain, but it didn't matter. The more I defended myself, the angrier he got. Eventually, he punched the wall beside my head. That sound, The hollow thud of plaster cracking stayed with me for weeks. He didn't touch me, but in that moment, I felt the invisible bruise of fear bloom inside me. After he stormed out, I sat on the floor, staring at the hole in the wall. My hands were shaking, my breath uneven. I realized I wasn't scared of what he'd do next. I was scared of who I was becoming. A woman who apologized for things she didn't do, who hid pieces of herself just to survive another day. That night, I called Layla. It was past midnight, but she answered on the first ring. I didn't tell her everything, just enough. She listened quietly, then said, "You need to start thinking about yourself now." Her words terrified me. Myself. I hadn't thought about myself in years. The next morning, Daniel apologized. He cried, said he was stressed, that he'd never forgive himself for losing his temper. He promised to be better. He even took me out for dinner, held my hand across the table like he used to. For a while, things were good again, calm, almost loving. But that's how the cycle works. You start to believe the good moments mean change.
You start to hope again.
And then, just when you lower your guard, the cruelty returns, sharper than before. Weeks later, it happened again.
Not the wall this time.
This time, it was my phone. He saw a message from a male coworker about a project and smashed the phone against a counter. "You love your job more than me," he said coldly. "Maybe you should marry it." I didn't cry. I just stood there, staring at the shattered screen, a reflection of my life. That night, I slept on the couch. The next morning, when he left for work, I found the pieces of my phone on the floor and gathered them in my hand. It felt symbolic somehow, like holding the broken proof of what my life had become. I went to the mirror and looked at myself. My eyes were dull, my posture small, my spirit almost gone. I whispered, "You can't keep doing this." And for the first time, I didn't just whisper it, I believed it. I didn't leave that day. Not yet. But I began to plan. Quietly. Secretly. I opened a separate bank account. I started saving small amounts from my salary. I contacted a therapist through my company's wellness program. Every small step felt like rebellion. He didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. His attention had shifted elsewhere, and for the first time, his distance became my protection. Each day, I grew a little stronger. Each night, I told myself, soon. I didn't know when the final breaking point would come, but I could feel it approaching, like a storm I was finally ready to face. And when it came, it would change everything. There's a moment when pain stops being shocking. It just settles in quiet and familiar, like background noise you learn to live with. 4 months I lived in that noise, until the day it grew too loud to ignore. It started like any other Saturday. Daniel woke up late, irritated that I'd gone for a walk before he did. The therapist I'd secretly been seeing had suggested small acts of independence. "Do something that belongs only to you," she'd said. That morning stroll was mine, 15 minutes of air that didn't feel heavy. When I came home, he was waiting in the kitchen, arms crossed. Trying to avoid me again? "It was just a walk," I said quietly. He laughed, low and bitter.
"Right.
Because marriage means doing whatever you want." He didn't yell. He just kept talking, words meant to shrink me. By now I knew the rhythm. Accusation, guilt, apology, calm. But that day, something inside me refused to bend. I poured myself coffee and said nothing. Silence, I'd learned, could be power too. That's when he shoved the mug off the counter. It shattered at my feet, coffee splattering my legs. I flinched but didn't move. His face changed. He saw it too, the lack of fear. I wasn't trembling anymore. He muttered something and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames. One frame fell, a photo from our honeymoon, all smiles and sand and fake promises. I stared at it for a long time before setting it face down on the counter. That afternoon, I called Layla. My voice shook. "I think it's time," I said.
She didn't ask for details.
"Tell me what you need." Over the next few weeks, I built my escape piece by piece. Every night after he slept, I packed small things, documents, a few clothes, the journal that had become my sanity. I stored them at Layla's place. I told myself I was preparing for just in case, but deep down, I knew the day was coming. Daniel grew unpredictable. Some mornings he was kind again, asking if we could start fresh. Other days he'd pick fights over nothing. I could see the guilt flicker behind his eyes sometimes, but remorse never lasted long. Control was his language, cruelty, his punctuation. One evening, he found a business card from my therapist in my purse. My stomach dropped the moment he held it up. "What's this?" "She's just someone from work." I lied, too quickly. He read the name, searched it online, and his face hardened. "You think I'm crazy?" he hissed.
No.
He threw the card onto the table. "You talk about me to strangers? After everything I do for you." That night, I slept in the guest room. I locked the door and pressed a chair under the handle, hand shaking. He didn't try to come in. The silence on the other side of the door was worse than shouting. At dawn, I decided. I was leaving. I waited until he left for work, then moved fast. I grabbed the last of my things, my passport, my small stash of money. My heart raced as I locked the door behind me for the final time. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. I kept expecting him to appear, to stop me. But he didn't. When I stepped outside, sunlight hit my face, and for a brief, trembling moment, I felt free. Then the tears came, quiet, unstoppable. I walked straight to Layla's car, waiting at the corner, and we drove away without looking back. For the first few days, I couldn't sleep. Every noise made me flinch. Every shadow felt like him. Layla made tea, sat beside me, and never pushed. I filed for separation a week later. Signing those papers felt surreal, like erasing a decade of my life with a single pen stroke. Daniel called, texted, begged. Then he threatened. "You'll regret this," one message said. I blocked him, changed my number, moved into a small rented room near my work. My therapist called it a safe space. To me, it was survival. The silence there was different, peaceful, not frightening. I started sleeping again, though dreams of him still haunted me. In those dreams, he'd appear smiling, saying, "See? You can't live without me." And I'd wake up gasping, clutching the blanket, whispering back, "Watch me." Healing wasn't a straight line. Some mornings I missed him, or maybe I missed the person I thought he was. I'd scroll through old photos, trying to recognize the woman smiling beside him. She looked so sure, so hopeful. I didn't hate her, I pitied her. She wanted to be loved so badly that she mistook control for care. Therapy became my anchor. My therapist told me, "You learn to survive. Now you have to learn to live." At first, I didn't know the difference. Survival was routine, breathing carefully, staying invisible. Living meant rediscovering color, sound, laughter. It felt foreign. But slowly I tried. I started writing again, stories, memories, anything that reminded me I had a voice. I went out alone to cafes, ordered coffee, without fear of judgment. One afternoon, sitting by a window as rain pattered outside, I realized I wasn't thinking about him. Not even a little. The quiet in my head felt strange and beautiful. Weeks turned into months. The bruises no one could see began to fade. My confidence returned in small doses, a new haircut, a weekend trip with friends, laughter that didn't feel forced. For the first time in years, I looked in the mirror and saw myself, not the wife, not the victim, just me. But healing also meant facing the hardest truth. I had allowed the pain to continue because I was afraid of being alone. That fear had chained me more tightly than his words ever could. Understanding that wasn't self-blame, it was liberation. Because once you name a chain, you can break it. The last time I saw Daniel was in the courthouse.
He looked smaller, somehow lost.
He tried to meet my eyes, but I couldn't. Not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to say. The judge read the decision. It was over. When I walked out of that building, autumn leaves scattered across the steps. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, it didn't hurt. Freedom didn't feel like fireworks, it felt like stillness. Quiet, steady, real. That night, I sat by my window again, the same way I had years ago when I first realized something was wrong. Only this time, I wasn't whispering for courage. I was thanking the woman who had found it. I still keep that broken honeymoon photo in a drawer. Not as a reminder of pain, but of survival. Because the woman in that picture had no idea how strong she would have to become. And the woman I am now, she owes everything to her. People talk about freedom like it's an instant, like one day you walk out and everything suddenly feels light and easy. It isn't like that. Freedom is messy. It's waking up in the middle of the night reaching for someone who's no longer there. It's crying in grocery aisles because you forgot what kind of cereal you actually like. It's silence that feels both peaceful and unbearably loud. But even in the mess, there's beauty. Because slowly you start to build a life that belongs to you. After the divorce was finalized, I took a week off work. I packed a small suitcase, turned off my phone, and drove to the seaside town where my parents used to take me as a child. The air smelled like salt and possibility. I rented a tiny cabin near the cliffs and spent my mornings walking barefoot on the sand, feeling the cool water touch my feet. For the first time in years, no one asked me where I was going or when I'd be back. No one checked my phone. No one judged my silence. I felt strange at first, disconnected, almost guilty for enjoying my own company. But then I began to understand. Peace can feel uncomfortable when you've lived in chaos too long. The first few days, I wrote letters I never sent.
Letters to him.
Letters to the girl I used to be. Letters to the future version of myself. I poured out everything I'd been carrying: anger, grief, shame, relief. Then one evening, as the sun set over the ocean, I tore them up and let the pieces drift into the tide. It wasn't forgiveness, it was release. Healing wasn't linear. Some mornings I felt strong, others I'd break down for no reason. I learned that grief doesn't just come from losing someone, it comes from losing the version of yourself that existed with them. I was grieving the woman who kept hoping, the one who tried so hard to be enough. But little by little, I started finding new pieces of myself. I joined a yoga class not because I wanted to be fit, but because I needed to feel grounded in my own body again. I took cooking lessons, burned half the recipes, laughed, and tried again. I met new people, people who didn't know me as Daniel's wife, just me. At first, it felt terrifying to introduce myself without that title, but slowly, it became liberating. One evening after class, I sat at a cafe by myself, reading. The waitress asked if I was waiting for someone. I smiled and said, "No, just me." It was such a simple thing, but the freedom in that moment nearly made me cry. Months passed. The nightmares grew less frequent. The guilt faded into memory. The walls I'd built around my heart began to soften. I started trusting again, first in myself, then in life. And then one afternoon I met someone. It wasn't planned. I wasn't even looking. His name was Adam, a quiet soul with kind eyes who sat beside me during a workshop on mindfulness. We talked about books, about travel, about the little things that make life meaningful. He never asked about my past. He just listened when I chose to share it. What surprised me most wasn't falling for him. It was realizing I no longer needed someone to make me feel whole. For the first time, love didn't feel like rescue. It felt like respect. He never tried to fix me. He just saw me as I was, scars and all. One night, as we walked by the river, he took my hand gently and said, "You smile like someone who fought to find that light again." I looked at the reflection of the city lights on the water and realized he was right. My smile wasn't effortless, but it was real. Love felt different now, quieter, slower, softer.
I didn't lose myself in it this time.
I stayed rooted, aware that my happiness belonged to me first. I often think back to the woman who sat by that window years ago, whispering, "Something's wrong." She didn't know then that her voice would save her one day. She didn't know that pain could become strength, that endings could become beginnings. There are still moments when the past visits me, a sound, a scent, a certain kind of silence. But I don't run from it anymore. I acknowledge it, breathe through it, and let it pass. Because healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering who you were before the hurt and who you became after surviving it. Sometimes, people ask me if I ever regret marrying him.
I used to say yes.
But now, I think differently. That marriage broke me, yes, but it also forced me to rebuild from the inside out. It taught me that love without respect isn't love at all, and that losing someone who hurts you isn't a tragedy. It's a gift. I keep a journal still. The last entry I wrote reads, "I'm not the woman I was. I'm not the woman he tried to make me. I'm the woman who walked away and learned to stand tall again." Every word feels earned. Today, my life is simple but full. Mornings with tea by the window, evenings spent painting or writing, laughter shared with friends who remind me how far I've come. Some days, I still talk to that version of me who is afraid to leave. I tell her, "You did it. You survived." And in her silence, I can almost hear her whisper back, "Thank you." Because saving myself wasn't just about leaving him, it was about coming home to me.